While it was 100% a combined team effort to give the Wild a 1-0 lead in the series, three players stood out to me from their Game 1 win in double overtime. We discuss today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day, and make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout round one. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we break down three pivotal performances that allowed the Wild to take a 1-0 series lead after an unbelievable double overtime win. We'll talk Brock Faber, we'll talk Filip Gustavsson, and we will talk Sam Steele as well. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. What a game that was. And this is not going to be the only episode that we have today because there are a ton of angles to break down in this game. But I did want to just start with the three pivotal performances that really helped shape the game one win for the Minnesota Wild. Again, 3-2 in double overtime, longest game in Minnesota Wild history at 4 hours and 12 minutes. Ryan Hartman seals it with the overtime winner after the puck did some interesting things behind Jake Oettinger, and it bounced out right in front, and Hartman was right there to be able to put it past Jake Oettinger. I saw somebody on Twitter, in fact, tweet out almost as soon as that play happened that with the way Oettinger was playing, it felt like it was going to take an odd bounce for the Wild to pick up the win, and they did. There are a lot of players, and huge applause to the Wild as a team, the coaching staff. Everyone bought into what it was going to take to come away with a win in this game. And to a man, everyone that played in this game had a pivotal role in the outcome. And if you want to start with Sam Steele, who had the breakaway goal, just embodying that next man up mentality, because the guy who he is replacing in the lineup, Joel Eriksson Ek, getting so close to returning in this series, Sam Steele playing like a guy that does not want to come out of the lineup. Not only did he have the goal against Jake Oettinger, he battled along the boards all night long. He had some time on the penalty kill that was absolutely pivotal. Especially on one of those final couple of power plays in which Jared Spurgeon was called for the penalty. He did all the little things. He perfectly embodied the attention to detail that it was going to require the Wilds to come away with the win, which was beating Stars players to the puck, winning the battles on the outside, and just playing like a guy who does not want to come out of the lineup when that decision inevitably is made. And you look at the numbers that Steele had. He had the goal. He also had an assist. He played 25 minutes and held his own in the faceoff circle. He had it's crazy to think that he had 37 draws by himself. And yeah, 43.2%, not great. 16 wins, 21 losses. But Dallas is a team that really dominates the faceoff circle against just about anybody they play. And for him to hold his own and to just continue to churn out quality play after quality play, 3 hits, he had 3 shots as well, was a +2 in this game. And so for Sam Steele, just a sensational performance to the point now that when Joel Eriksson Ek is ready to return, although it depends on the status of Ryan Hartman, as Hartman was injured in the game. And so his availability could entirely depend on whether or not Steele remains in this game. But let's say Hartman is not able to go in the next game. And let's say Joel Eriksson Ek does draw back into the lineup. Well, then you have found another spot for Sam Steele to move around. He brings you that in a pinch. He brings you some solid speed and some good energy. And a guy who is playing in his first career playoff game, and he gets a goal and he assists on the eventual game winner. Not a bad postseason debut for a guy in Sam Steele. And Steele, I think, helped perfectly embody the overall demeanor of the Wild during the course of this game. It just was a team that looked just perfectly calm and at ease in what was a really tense hockey game. There was a ton of physicality. You had the Matt Dumba hit that ended up leading to Joe Pavelski leaving the game. After that, there was certainly plenty of physicality between the two teams back and forth. But the Wild they never looked like a team where the moment was too big. You had some of that in game one last year for the Wild, in which they lost 4-0, but you didn't get that sense with the Wild here this year that they were eager to take the challenges that Dallas was throwing at them. And Steele embodied that perfectly, as did the Minnesota Wild up and down the roster, just doing what they needed to do and showing that the moment was not too big. It was just such an unbelievably just an unbelievable performance by this team, considering how things ended in the regular season, to be able to get to this level on the biggest stage. So Sam Steele, a huge reason that this game ended up going the way that it did, because he filled a very pivotal spot in the lineup. I know he didn't directly fill it, but he filled Joel Eriksson Ek's spot in the lineup, and just looked the part, looked like he was ready to go from the get-go, and was just sensational tonight. Obviously, the big performer in this game was none other than Filip Gustavsson. We'll talk about a little bit of an uneasy start, but an absolutely lights-out finish for Gus Bus, as he helped keep the Wild in it through a very, very dicey overtime. We'll talk about that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild, after a word from our sponsor, which is the official sports betting partner of Locked On. That is FanDuel Sportsbook. Grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, make sure you check out the Locked On Stars podcast to hear how the Stars are handling their Game 1 loss. Obviously, a lot of concern over Joe Pavelski's status, but make sure to check out Dane Lewis and Jack Locked On Stars to hear how Dallas is handling being down 1-0 in this series. And for the everydayers, of course, we'll take a further look at this series, but with the special teams battle coming up later today as well. Just continuing to recap, an unbelievable 3-2 double overtime win for the Minnesota Wild over the Dallas Stars. They now lead the series 1-0. They did what the road team is supposed to do and stole one of the first two games And Stoll is obviously not giving the Wild enough credit for a team that, by and large, through the first 3 periods, dominated the play in 5-on-5. When the Wild were able to stay at even strength, they dominated large stretches of regulation. Dallas started to get their legs under them in overtime, and there were some moments in which the Minnesota Wild were hanging on down the stretch in the first overtime, in the second overtime. But Filip Gustavsson, with one of the unbelievable performances that you'll see, franchise record for saves, in a franchise record for longest game in franchise history, he, simply put, was ready for the moment and gave this team an opportunity for them to steal this one on the road because of his performance. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. 51 out of 53 in saves, and the Stars just ratcheted up the pressure as the game got into the later stages of the third period, as the game got into the first overtime, as the Stars went on the power play in overtime, not once, but twice. And Gustavsson just continued to turn shot after shot away down the stretch. Now, he did give up a couple of softer goals early on in the game, and we got to keep in mind, too, that this was Filip Gustavsson's first playoff start. So, yeah, the nerves were there early on in the game, but Gustavsson clamped down. He tightened things up, and just was – I can't say enough about the performance that Filip Gustavsson had, but I think that his style helped this Wild team down the stretch when you had so many players that had played so many minutes and were just grasping for whatever they could find out there. The fact that Gustavsson is more prone to ice the puck than, say, Marc-Andre Fleury is, I think that was a factor in this one down the stretch, in overtime, in double overtime, in regulation even. Gustavsson's ability to grab the puck, prevent second, third looks, and to just ice it to give his guys an opportunity to just get a breath, I think was huge down the stretch, and had just some unbelievable saves. Jason Robertson had a ton of great looks all the way up and down the lineup for the Dallas Stars. They had fantastic opportunities in overtime, and somehow Filip Gustavsson came away as the winner in a goalie battle between him and Jake Ottinger. This has been what Gustavsson has done all season. Filip Gustavsson has had so many performances in which he simply has just not budged, and it has led to the Wild winning a lot of games they probably weren't expected to. But this is why having Filip Gustavsson is so important this season, because Filip Gustavsson has shown the ability to do that no matter the opponent, and in the postseason that matters. The Wild did not have that type of goalie play last year against the St. Louis Blues. Now, you could argue the defense in front of the goalie play was not great either. Defense was definitely up to the test in this one this evening, but so was Filip Gustavsson, because, again, I go back to overtime and double overtime. There were no shortage of opportunities for the Dallas Stars in those two periods, and yet they were not able to come away with any goals. And so I think it's for that reason, and I have seen this on Twitter a few times, but I want to be out in front and on the right side of this thing. There is absolutely zero reason for a goalie change going into game 2. It's not something that I think should even be considered, because Filip Gustavsson kept you in that game, kept the Wild in the game until they were able to finally get one past Jake Ottinger. He had maybe 15 or 20 saves that were just highlight reel saves throughout the course of the night. And so I'm not entertaining. I know Marc-Andre Fleury is there with his bevy of postseason experience, but Filip Gustavsson is the reason you got here, and Filip Gustavsson is the reason you are leading the series 1-0. So it's Gus Bus as far as he can take you in this series, and that's all I'm going to say. All I'm going to say about it. So Sam Steele, Filip Gustavsson. We got to finish today talking about a player who had, before tonight, 2 career NHL games, and yet gave the Wilds just a breath of fresh air on defense. Brock Faber. We're going to finish talking about his performance as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after a word from our sponsors. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by a product I use every single day. That is AG1 by Athletic Greens. Maybe you're like me. You want to be healthy and eat well, but it's always easier said than done. That's no longer the case with AG1. With 1 delicious scoop of AG1 in a glass of water each day, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. It can be hard and expensive to keep track of multiple different supplements and vitamins, not to mention how hard it can be on your stomach. AG1 costs you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, again, make sure you check out the Locked On Stars podcast to get the full lowdown on how the Stars regroup after losing Game 1. So we talked about a couple of pivotal performances in this one, and we started with Sam Steele. We talked about Filip Gustavsson. Got to talk about the kid. Let's talk about Brock Faber to finish things up here, who we didn't know if he was going to play to start the series, and then ended up getting into warmups. Of course, John Klingberg a little dinged up, so he didn't play. And your final pairing, that third pairing ends up being John Merrill and Brock Faber. And you could have told me that the Wild had just taken Jared Spurgeon and put him back out on the ice with Faber's number, and I wouldn't have objected to it. Brock Faber was unreal in this game tonight. And for a kid who a couple of weeks ago was playing in the national championship game as a Gopher, now playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs in his third career NHL game, just looking like a guy who is a 15-year NHL vet. He is so calm and collected and so confident, too, in what he's doing out there. That's a huge part of it as well. But not only that, he just is so physical on the boards, too. So many times just looking up, watching the broadcast, and you tune in and you see Faber behind the net just battling for a puck, or in a couple of instances getting hit pretty hard on the boards and just not missing a beat, and continuing to just fight through some very physical play by the Dallas Stars. Several different statistics that could further back me up And so we turn, as always, to Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn podcast, who again does such a good job of just distilling the stats to the point that it makes it easy for those who, like myself, who aren't super stat-oriented, but still want to help further paint the picture for what Faber has been able to do. Faber spent the majority of his 5-on-5 time on ice, which was 16 minutes, 55 seconds, against Mason Marchment, Max Domi, Miro Heiskanen, and Yanni Hakanpää. And for Faber, the Wild were out-attempted 20-13 in Faber's minutes, but they had a clear edge in quality. 75% of the expected goal share at 5-on-5 with Faber out there. And let's look no further than the play of the game, in which Faber was able to get just enough of his stick on a shot from right in front of the net. Had it not been hit by Faber's stick, it probably ends up winning the game for the Dallas Stars. And yet Faber out there in very critical spots, playing in overtime, playing in double overtime. There was one point in the third period where the Wild had gone down to playing 5 defensemen, or basically just rotating Faber with various people because of how good he was out there on the ice. And so a guy who played well above his the expectations that you would have for a guy who's playing in his third career NHL game. And so Faber able to step in and provide, because that was one of the big concern spots heading into this series, was that third line D pairing. And Brock Faber, by and large by himself, was able to erase a lot of those concerns with his play here in game one. I do also want to throw out a couple of honorable mentions. We have to talk about the fact that, yes, Matt Dumba did have the hit that knocked Joe Pavelski out of the game. But beyond that, it was a Matt Dumba we have not seen in a while, particularly on the defensive end. That might have been one of his better games that he's played defensively as a member of this Minnesota Wild squad. But so many guys who just simplified things a little bit. You didn't have the home run passes where you're trying to go from your zone to the top of the opponent's zone. The Wild were just way more comfortable keeping things flowing, keeping things moving, as opposed to trying to make those home run swings. And it just, we saw the hype video before the game, Dean Evison talking about the new slogan for this team this year, which is grit first. No better way to put what they were able to do to the Dallas Stars here in game one of this series. And Dallas will bounce back. This series is not going to be a 4-0 sweep for the Minnesota Wilds. I still am of the belief that it's going to go to probably 7 games. But for the Wild to start the series and for the Wild to start the series playing at their tempo and come away with a win on the road, doesn't that feel a little familiar of being on the wrong end of that in last year's postseason? Feels good to come away on the right end, doesn't it? There's a lot of work to do, but it really was just an impressive top to bottom effort from the Wild to get everybody to buy in, to get everybody to do the little things, and to take most of the best that your opponent has to give and to come away with a win in a incredibly raucous postseason atmosphere. It feels pretty good to be the one coming out on top of that game, because we've seen it go so often the other way. In fact, to the point that I actually went through and did the math. Minnesota Wild in game ones in the last several postseasons back to 02-03. Minnesota Wild are 4-12, or were 4-12 in game ones. And so 5-12 now after their effort here in this one against the Dallas Stars. And again, you just, the words just don't do it justice what we saw the Wild do in this one here today, which means now ice up, and we've got a game 2 coming up on Wednesday night that, I don't know, hopefully is somewhat less of a thriller. Of course, I'm joking. Give me every bit of the thriller, every bit as much as we can have. Just maybe not a 4-hour game. But if we get it, we get it. Regardless, that is a heck of a way to start a postseason series, and we are just getting started between these two teams. That will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. So again, now that your first listen of the day is done, I encourage you to check out the Locked On Stars podcast to hear how Dallas will rebound after a Game 1 loss against the Minnesota Wild on their home ice. Locked On Stars is available wherever you listen to your podcasts, just like Locked On Wild. So make sure you follow along with us as we guide you through the rest of the postseason and get you geared up for Game 2 with pre- and post-game content, as well as full episodes all throughout the week. So make sure you follow along and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new content from Locked On Wild. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.